I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters Omaha, and tonight we're going to tie three flies that are similar in purpose, um, or can be, and they're also similar in some of the materials that are used in them. Um, so the first one is Griffith's Gnat, and it's kind of funny. The Griffith's Gnat is often attributed to George Griffith, one of the co-founders of Trout Unlimited. But it'd be better to say that it was named after him. The fly was shown to George in 1939 by a man named Walt Shaw. It became George's favorite pattern, and so that's where it got its name. Nobody knows the true origin of the fly, but it's very popular even to this day. It's a worldwide favorite in still water where midge hatches can be heavy. If you want, when this is all over with, I'll go into some of the materials I used for the midge presentation when I did that for Al's Friday Night Flies last year, I think it was. Kind of showing the midge life cycle and why these flies tend to represent midges, but actually being used in larger sizes. So you actually get a discount on tonight's presentation because I don't have roadmap flies. I don't have examples for you, so you're just going to have to see it evolve. So for the Griffith's Gnat, the materials are basically a grizzly palmered hackle and peacock herl, that and thread. So there's really not that much to it. You can crank out a lot of these for fairly easily. And when it's done, I'll explain a little bit out of the shape of it, why it represents midge adults. So I'm going to start the thread. Because this is a 14, I think. I'm just going to lay down too fast. Lay down a thread base. And I'm first going to tie in the hackle. So for the hackle, hackle can be expensive, especially now that we have all the genetic premium hackle. This is an example of a saddle hackle value pack. These things are about a foot long, and they're about the same size all the way down that feather. This one's from Hairline. Doesn't have the actual price tag on it. But this is an example of where you can get these value packs. Dark brown, there's a ginger, light brown. There's some kind of a dark dun. There's some black, there's white and grizzly. And you get like a couple of each. You can probably tie 100 flies in each one of those things. As a matter of fact, whiting, not as many, there's not as many feathers in that keel pack that I had. But these whiting, they call them 100 packs. Whiting 100s. These are all about size 14. I'd say they're like 16 to 12. But most of them are size 14. You can get one of these packs and you can tie dry flies for years out of one of these. And for flies like this, those are actually really good. So for the Griffith's Gnat, I'm actually going to take this black thread off because I kind of like to show you, I call it a royal Griffith's Gnat. It's kind of a little variant that I did to the pattern. And although this is kind of a heavy thread, this is 100, well, it's 140 denier. It shouldn't be too bad. I'm going to actually use this red thread. And then I'm going to take that thread and I'm going to go down around the bend till it's about a 45-degree angle when I hold it to the point. You can see that. And then I'm going to come back over it, back to the normal end of the shank, which is right there where the gouge of the barb starts up. So at this point, actually, I'm going to move my thread forward in loose wraps just to get it out of the way. I'm going to take a little bit of UV resin, put just a touch on there. And I'm going to grab my bodkin and just take a little bit of that off. I have a little bit too much. All I want to do is protect that thread that goes around the bend there, and just a thin coat of UV resin. And now that's just kind of a little sort of a tag at the base of that. So now what I'm going to do is tie in a grizzly hackle. And I have a piece of this, one of those genetic saddle hackles that's all the same size. So this will tie several flies. And I'm going to strip some away from the rachis there. But then for this Griffith's Gnat, I'm going to actually have the dull side facing me, and then I'm going to take some off the top here. So I've got a little bit more of the stem stripped here on the top than I do on the bottom. And that's how I'm going to lay that. Whoops. That's how I'm going to lay that stem in there. And then I'm going to take some peacock herl. And I'll take two peacock herls. I just stripped them off of down here lower. The little barbs on the herls are a little bit shorter than the ones up closer to the eye. So I've got two of them, same length. You can use strung peacock herl if you have it. I'm going to break off about about an inch off of the end, off the tips, because they are usually brittle up there and they usually break anyway. And I'm going to tie those herls in right back to the end of the shank right there. So now I'm going to zoom out, put this down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to take that peacock herl. Now you can do this in a couple of ways. For the showiest peacock herl, if you leave your thread hanging for like some weight and wrap against that thread, that tends to kind of brush the fibers out so they stand up well. and it also keeps them nice and close together. And your thread just kind of rides along as you wrap that herl forward, but it's not as sturdy as if you wrap that herl around your thread like I've done before. And then after I get it wrapped several times, I'll give it another twist and spin my bobbin just to make sure my thread's kind of doing the same thing my fingers are trying to do to the herl. So now I kind of have a chenille made out of peacock herl. And if I make touching turns, I have a very sturdy, reinforced peacock herl for the body. I'm going to go almost to the eye and then untwist that. And then I'll clip that free. Now I'll take that. I will use a hackle pliers actually, because this one's a little bit shorter. And then since I stripped the fibers on that leading edge of the rachis of this feather, I don't have a lot of fibers sticking back toward the back. So it's more of a straight up and down. Now, this hackle is palmered through the body. I want some of the peacock herl to show through, but I also want it to float high. So you don't want real spaced wraps. It just kind of has to be a happy medium between being able to see the peacock herl and having enough hackle to really float that fly. So now I'll go a couple times over the hackle, holding my thread tight, stroke everything back out of the way. And it looks like I might get some in the coming forward. If I do, I'll have to just clip those out. But and then I'll try to make a little bit of a pronounced red head here. And what that has done then is taken that hackle and kind of dog-legged it, like Al calls it, and I can just, if I hold the thread tight, I can just snip that off. That way I don't have to get my scissors in there. And then flip that guy out. Go. Now my thread's toward the back of the head area. I'll work my way toward the front. Oops, it slipped off. Let me just pull that free. Do it one more time. Toward the front. Pull it tight. And then I could use UV resin again, but I could also just use regular head cement, Sally Hansen's. Soaks into that red thread and really makes it a nice color. There's two magical, actually, one of the reasons I like this so well is I've always thought, and I've said before, that red is a special color. When it comes to trout, a lot of your more popular flies and best fish catching flies have red in them. Peacock herl is my spirit material. I love anything that has peacock herl in it. And then grizzly, the coloring of grizzly hackle. I've kind of read this before, and I kind of believe that the black and the white together like that just kind of gives a indication of movement when the fish is looking at it from the bottom. Now, what this is supposed to represent is actually midge adults that are clustered together. Midges can be very, very small, size 30, 28, and probably smaller. Fish love to eat them, and they can be very, very heavy in lakes. Some back eddies in streams, but mostly in slow or still water. Midge hatches can be extremely heavy, and when they happen, you've got a certain amount of time before the adults fly away, do their mating swarm, come back to the surface. I'll show you all this later. And they basically die on the surface in large numbers, and the trout just sip them up. And when they do, just like tricos, a lot of the adults will just kind of cluster together in groups. And so the fish will just come up and grab those clusters of midges. And so the Griffith's gnat is one of those cluster midge patterns.
Mike, I've started using to cut, especially with Semper Fly. I've started using a scalpel to do the cutting, and a couple of reasons. Number one, it's sharp and it cuts that Semper Fly thread really easily. And number two, the only thing that the scalpel will cut is something that's got tension in it. So, for example, on the hackle that you just tore off, if you hold that tight and run a scalpel up against it, it'll cut that hackle stem, and it will not do anything with the hackle you got tied on the hook, because as the blade approaches it, it just pushes it aside. So,
right, there's a couple ways to do that. One is to open your scissors to a very small V there and push that against the hackle stem. That'll do the same thing. It won't cut any of those hackles, but it'll break the stem. Tim Flagler does this with thread, where he takes the base of his whip finish tool and just kind of runs a chisel on it a little bit. You don't want it to be sharp where it's going to be stabbing you and cutting you, but just a little bit of an edge there to where when the thread's done, you can just pop the thread with that chisel point, and it'll break the thread. A lot of times, especially with the real fine point scissors, you can get in there and cut the thread and not cause a problem, especially if you get in the habit of, instead of going up like this to cut your thread, you actually go up like this and make sure if it does cut any hackle fibers, it's only going to be one or two.
Yeah, it also helps if you got a rotary vise, you can just turn the vise upside down and get the thread out of the way and cut it that way. Yeah.
Right. And then if you're a little bit shaky, you don't really see it. I don't say much about it, but a lot of times I'll have my hand on the vise, and if I touch my finger to my thumb, now all of a sudden this hand doesn't shake anymore, and it holds everything steady, and I can do the fine work. So if I'm doing something with spun deer hair or something like that, I'll definitely put my hands together like this, and so one hand on the vise, the other hand isn't going like this. It's actually. So I think I've said this before. This is one of my favorite flies to use in a bluegill spawn. It floats like a cork because it's lots of hackle and a very light, small dry fly hook. It's small, so normally when they take it, when they flare their gills and draw in whatever bug they're eating, it's not really big enough for them to suck it way down in there. A lot of times when you get them on a small fly like this, it's right in the lip, and it's pretty easy to take it out. So that's the Griffin.
A modification of that fly is also very, very popular down at Bennett Springs, the crackleback.
So I think the crackleback is its own thing. I can, again, we're only at 25 minutes here. We'll see what the other flies bring. But the crackleback is, yes, it is very similar. It's a color along the bottom. And then the peacock herl is actually drawn across the top like a shellback.
Yeah.
And then the hackle is wound on there.
Yep.
Hey, Mike, I have a hackle question.
Go ahead, sir.
Sometimes my hackle likes to want to attempt a corkscrew. Did I tie it in wrong? Did I not cut the rachis right? It just sometimes wants to do a twist in it.
So some hackles will have a little bit of a natural twist to them. You look at this one. I don't know if you can see that. This is one of those genetics, and it comes around and twists like that. But when you're wrapping it, I'll try to focus on the next fly and see if I can see that happening. It could be one of those things that I just take care of on my own and don't really realize that it's a problem. But the next one is, I think this is one of Gretchen's favorites. I think she was always talking about her dad tying these a lot, but it's the Renegade. And it was created by Idaho Guide. Well, there's also some controversy in who created it. It was either Taylor Beartrax Williams in Idaho, or it was Taylor Beartrax Williams in Wyoming, or it was a different guy in Colorado who first tied this fly. But what is known is that Ernest Hemingway, it was one of his favorite flies to fish with. I've read where this Taylor Williams was a fishing companion of Ernest Hemingway, but I don't know. You know, when you read so many things on the interwebs, you kind of think most of it is true, but then you get surprises. When you read about 6 stories and 3 of them are all telling you different things, it's hard to know what's right and what's wrong. I seem to have lost one of my pieces of this fly, but for the Renegade, I'm going to go ahead with some black thread. It doesn't have to be the Semper fly, but I've got that loaded here, so. I'll lay down a thread base at least to the halfway point. And then I pre-cut a pretty nice long piece, but I guess I'll have to cut it again. I'm going to use a little bit of Mylar tinsel. And this Mylar tinsel is silver on one side, gold on the other. So if I want gold to be showing, I want to tie it with the silver side facing me. And this small stuff here, it says 1618. I don't know. I don't think that means the hook size. I think that's just what they used for a measurement. But I'm going to wrap this back to the bend of the hook. And then I'm going to take spiraled wraps forward to get it out of the way. Now, as I wrap this, Nope, that's the silver side. So sometimes if you take it and just kind of work with it, you can do this with a hackle too, Bill. Just kind of spin it around, and sometimes it'll take that other turn. That looks like it's not doing that. So what I'll do is actually wrap in the opposite direction to make sure I have the gold side out. With this real fine tinsel, it's not as easy as the big stuff. I'm going to go down about 4 turns and then come back over the top of it to just give a little bit of a gold tag there. And then I'll come back and bring my thread back to where I was. And I'll tie that tinsel off. Oh, I let go. Do that again. So I've got my wraps down. Completely redo that. All right. 3. There's 4 turns down. And then I'll start my way back up. And I think I got confused because I had reverse wrapped that. And so it didn't grab the tinsel when I thought it would have. So now it's grabbed. And I can go ahead and tie that down, and I'll clip it out of the way. This isn't going to cause any bulk, so I'll just tie that down. Get it out of the way. Now, the next material is a brown hackle. And I like to use a good rich brown hackle. This is one of those EOs. And again, this time I'm just going to do it the normal way with the shiny side facing me. I've got a few more hackles pulled out of the top than on the bottom. And I'm going to tie this in. Right back to the end. And then loose spirals, I'm going to bring it back to the eye of the hook to get it out of the way. Now, this being a nice long feather, it gives me the luxury of I'm holding this feather. I guess I'm actually orienting it, holding it so that it's like perpendicular to me. So all the wraps are parallel. That makes sense. So as I'm wrapping this, I'm keeping that feather straight. So if it looks like it's going to start twisting, I can twist the feather and get it to where this part is flat. I'm wrapping a couple of them under, but it's not too bad. So that's probably enough of the brown. That's a little bit long, but I sized that feather. But so since I made those loose spirals forward, I'm just going to back that up to my point where I need to tie this feather in. Take a couple wraps over. And then clip that out of the way. Now I'm going to take those hackles and try to tie up against them and get them going in the right direction. It looks like about the best I can do. I'm going to take a couple more peacock curls and do the same thing. There's two. Clip off the tips. And I'll tie those in and bring my thread forward. And if I want to make this stronger, which I do, I'll go ahead and do that. Twisting the herl around the thread. Spin my bobbin so my thread's going in the right direction, and then just spin that. And then wrap my body forward to about where my thread was. So I was about an eye length back. And I'll tie off that peacock herl. And then we go on with a white hackle on the front. So I'll do the same thing where I pull a few of them off. Stem is a little bit long. Tie that hackle stem in with nice tight wraps. And then as I wrap this forward, I want a good 4 or 5 wraps. And of course, it depends on the density of your hackle. Take 2 wraps, fold everything back. And starting at the eye, I'll work backwards a little bit. And then I'll do just a small notch in my scissors. And instead of snipping, I'll just push against that rachis and break it. Now I had one leaning forward, and hopefully I moved it out of the way. And I'll be able to whip finish. Pull that nice and tight. And use the chisel point to break my thread. So now the Renegade, again, that brown hackle is probably one size too small, too large. See how it hangs down quite a bit? But that'll still ride on the surface. It's intended to be imitate any number of insects. I think originally it's said to represent a caddis, but with the brown and white together, you've got enough of a contrast to where it's real visible on the water to the fishermen. And that's the intent of this fore and aft hackle style with different colors, contrasting colors, is to give you that contrast that'll make it highly visible. But again, it could also be a midge cluster, a cluster of adult midges, or a cluster of adult mayflies. So that's the Renegade. And the third one, relatively similar, is the orange asher. This one was invented by Jack Howarth of Colorado Springs. It's a favorite in the Rocky Mountain West and also in now in New England streams. Seems to be another example of a fly that imitates a cluster of midge adults. It's highly visible, highly floating dry fly that would be especially good in the fall months when leaves have changed color. If you use the LaFontaine theory of attraction, where predominant color in the background would be more attractive to the fish. But also, this is highly popular in the lakes, Colorado high mountain lakes. I'm going to use orange thread. Again, this is the orange Asher, and it's basically orange floss and a grizzly hackle. So this is a 140 denier flat waxed nylon from Danville's. Which reminds me, when I talked to everybody about thread a while back, I was saying that Danville's thread is not flat, that it's, I think I was saying that Danville is one of the threads that are round. And then I happened to look at some of my spools that say flat waxed nylon. And I realized that I told a lie. Danville does have some thread that will go flat. And as you can see on this one, I spun it counterclockwise. And now my thread's going pretty flat. I'm going to make it a little bit heavier of a body than what this has given me. And I'll keep spinning it counterclockwise so I flatten the thread out. So without using floss, I just used my thread there. I've got a pretty nice little orange body there. This is a little bit smaller hackled fly. I've seen it a couple times where they say to use a hackle one size smaller than the hook. And so I've got that hackle tied in. I'll bring that up to the eye. And then because I left a little bit of rachis there on the oops, slipped out of my hackle pliers, or it broke. Hopefully this isn't a brittle feather. It started my hackle without any fibers leaning back to the back. Now again, this is palmered a little bit farther apart than what that was in the peacock hurl. I want to show the orange body. And so I come to the front. Take a turn over that hackle. I'll take my pliers off. Strip that back. And poke the hook into my thumb about 3 times. Tying a whip finish. And let's see, I used my scissors once. I used this once. Do that again. And then I'll just snap that forward. And that's the orange asher. Same thing, intended to be a midge cluster. And this is also popular in a like a lime green color, like a chartreuse lime green color.
And it should work to use the magic marker trick on white line to get your orange if you don't have any.
Yes, absolutely. There's I was actually when I was thinking about it today, I was thinking of tying the Renegade with white thread. And the reason is when you get toward the eye of the hook, sometimes this one didn't. But sometimes you end up with some black showing through because of the thread. Those hackle wraps were all pretty close together, so the black didn't show through. But I have seen that tied with a white thread just to make sure that doesn't happen. And then, of course, it would have a white head. Anytime you're using floss, like if I was doing this with an orange floss, this rayon no, I can see it, but I can't get it out. There it is. This rayon floss. It's beautiful colors, nice and glossy. But if I was to use that for the body and then it would get wet, it would turn just kind of a brown color. And that's mostly because of the black thread that's underneath this floss as I wrap it forward. So a lot of the people that do the fancy, say the Ray Bergman beautiful wet flies, Atlantic salmon flies, they use a lot of white thread. So the base underneath that floss is white, and then the water doesn't darken it to throw the color off. If you want to, especially with Vivas, the only Vivas I have is white, and a lot of times I've colored the thread black to finish off the head. If I wanted to use that thread just because of its strength and size. But absolutely, you could use orange to do the body and then color it if you want a black head. So that's the orange asher. Do you want me to do a crackleback? I did it a few sessions ago. Another option would be to do a hackle stacker of this orange asher. And I have never done that before, but I'll give it a shot if you want to experiment.
Yeah, let's go for it. I never heard of a hackle stacker.
Never.
Well, so I have some, the brand is gone now, but it's monofilament tying thread. So let's give it a shot. If it's a success, then we all witnessed a wonderful thing. If it's a failure, then I think I whined enough to let you know that I've never done this before. So orange asher, let's go back to that orange thread. And I'm just going to get several wraps to get that thread locked in. And then I'm going to take a piece of this monofilament thread. There's a large and a small. I think this is the large, which is actually seems to me like about maybe a 5X if it was tippet material. And I'm going to tie that in actually on top of the hook here. Whoops. So I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise as if I was looking down on it. So I make sure I reach over and grab that. Tie it down on top of the hook. And then I'll kind of lay down that orange base there. Flip this out of the way. That. Now I'm going to take a nice long kind of like to use one of these. I'm going to use one of these longer whiting hackles to make sure I've got enough. I don't know how much hackle space this takes. Grab a feather here. And I'm going to just kind of make a long stem here and tie that down. Now what the idea of this hackle stacker, as they call it, is to make it so that the hackle is mostly on top. So that makes this orange body ride a little bit further down in the surface film. So I've got stem or something there. Yep, that's okay. Right there. That's okay. That'll just have to stay there. So now, if I had a hackle gallows or something, that'd be kind of convenient. But I'm going to take that mono, pull it straight up, and then I'm going to start taking this hackle and wrapping it around that mono. Pulling down so I make sure that so I have that mono is wrapped around a couple fingers so I keep it tight. And then I want to keep wrapping this kind of like you're doing parachute hackle up that mono for about the length of what the fly is. Tighten that mono again. There we go. Now it's starting to look right. Wrap it around a few times and then slide it down seems to be the trick here. I have just about enough. So I'm going to take that now and I'm going to fold it forward a little bit towards me. Take a couple wraps. And I've left about an eye length at the eye there just to kind of make sure I don't crowd it too much. And I'm going to clip that out of the way. And then come back over the end of that mono. whip finish. And now take that hackle and just kind of stroke it up like that. Now your hackle is actually around that mono, and it's all on top of the hook. So then take some UV. Because that thread's going to be exposed to trout teeth. And also maybe even let that, put a tiny bit more on there. There's not much on this side. Even let a little bit of that UV resin work back into that hackle to keep it in place. And then boom. Now your hackle's on top. So when that rides in the surface film, it's going to sit there on top of that, and it'll ride a lot further down in the surface film. That's a hackle stacker. You can do that on a shorter, this is actually like for the orange asher hackle stacker is, goes the length of the body, of course, because on an orange asher, you would palmer the hackle. But you can do this on like a mayfly imitation where you'd have whatever the body is. And then at the thorax, you would, using monofilament or thread or whatever, you would wrap your hackle similar to a parachute, but then fold it down, tie it in, and then you've got just your hackle there at the front that's up on top. So it acts as a hackle and a wing, kind of like a comparadun.